guys, and welcome to day number 8 of my Inktober project for 2018. And because it is day 8, it is also the first day of the second week, and I really had a lot of fun creating this piece. I do think that the body turned out a bit strange in the final piece, and there are a few little elements that I think made it that way. But it sort of adds to the fact that I'm trying to relax a bit when it comes to my illustration. I don't want to be lazy, and I definitely want to improve and get better, but I'm trying to take it easy on myself and basically let myself know that it's okay if things don't go exactly according to plan. So as I mentioned in my last video, for day number 7, I realized that during this first week of Inktober, I hadn't really done a lot of human-focused pieces. The majority of the illustrations had their focal points or their primary focus on non-human or non-living objects. Now, there's definitely nothing wrong with that, and I do think that it's helping me to improve my storytelling skills, to be able to get an emotion or a feeling across while using objects or creatures that are not human. But I have missed drawing people because it is my specialty, and it is something that I genuinely enjoy incorporating into my artwork. And so when I picked the prompt moth at the end of yesterday's video, the first thing that came to mind was a human figure staring pretty straightforward with one of their eyes covered by a moth. After I had that idea in my head, it was kind of difficult to get it out, and so I did my thumbnails sort of revolving around that concept. I did do a handful of different designs, trying to figure out the best layout for the moths specifically. I knew that I didn't want to do just one moth because a lot of times if you have a singular object, it can look kind of out of place. So I knew I wanted to do 3. Odd numbers tend to be preferable over even numbers. I'm not sure exactly why that is. There's just something very aesthetically appealing about it. And another little composition tip is that if you arrange those elements in a triangle, it sort of draws your eye around the piece instead of focusing your eyes on one specific area. Now, the moths themselves were actually a lot of fun to draw, even though because of the size of the piece and the moths in the illustration, it was kind of difficult to get a lot of detail. And because I enjoyed drawing them so much, I do think that I will probably be incorporating at least a few more into a piece or 2 at some points throughout the rest of the month. Now, if you've been following my Inktober videos these past few days, something you may have noticed is that I have been experimenting with thinner lines. You may have noticed, you may not have noticed, it is a fairly subtle difference, but it's something that I've been having a lot of fun trying out and trying to get better at. Typically, when I do my illustrations, I will start with a thin line. I will usually use a 0.05 micron. And then eventually I'll go in with either a 0.5 micron or even a 0.8 and thicken up a lot of the lines. This is good for emphasis. I do think that line variation in general adds a lot to a piece, but the thickest pen that I used in this particular illustration was actually a 0.3 instead of a 0.5, and I think that the effect it gives is very interesting. It's more delicate in a sense, which, especially with specific themes, I really like. The thing that kind of set off this experimentation, I think, was day 4, in which the prompt was Raven, and I used a lot of more delicate, thinner lines, and I really loved the way that that piece turned out. I said then that I thought it was my favorite piece so far, and I still kind of stand by that, at least for now. And I've kind of been trying to replicate the feeling that that piece gave me. Something I find very interesting about working with thinner lines specifically is that it does tend to be more difficult. Sometimes when you use thicker lines, you have more to hide behind. The attention is so intense on those thick, bold outlines that you don't notice as many of the little mistakes that exist. This can be especially useful when you're just getting started with art and you're trying to figure out how things work. But eventually, I personally think that if inking is what you're trying to do, you need to at least try some thinner lines in your free time, because it really allows you to see where your mistakes are. There's no thick, bold outlines to hide behind. It is what it is, and it's a lot more clear in what it is. And that is kind of what I've been trying to achieve these past few days. Now, speaking of these last few days and kind of transitioning into the idea of a new week, in week 1, I was really just experimenting. I was trying new subject matters and just generally trying to get a feel for what I was doing. I didn't have anything set in stone. I was just playing around and trying to get myself into a little bit of a rhythm. But looking forward to week 2, I do think that I want to continue doing that, but I want to add on to it even more. For me, Inktober is a time where I can make a conscious effort towards continual improvement, and I can concentrate that into a month. A lot of times when I do monthly challenges like this, I feel like I advance in the span of 1 month by leaps and bounds, by large amounts that would typically take me a handful of months. However, when I make a conscious decision to look at my mistakes every single day and try to make them better, it forces you to improve. You may not always execute perfectly, but you are making mistakes, and we learn from mistakes, which I talked about in a previous video this month. And when you concentrate all of that experimentation and all of those mistakes into a month, your improvement and your growth can be extremely rapid if you direct it accordingly. And so, when it comes to week 2, I have some new goals that I want to incorporate on top of my old goals as a little bit of a refresh. My main goal that I was focusing on this Inktober is silhouette, where if you completely blacken the image, you still kind of get a general feel for what's happening. And I'm also working on tonal values, or the lights and darks of the pieces and their arrangement within the composition. However, as I make my way further into the month and hopefully continue to draw more humanoid characters, I would like to try some more interesting poses. I did this in day 2, where I gave my figure a little bit more motion in her pose. It's still a very basic standing position, but I did try to push outside of someone simply standing straight up and down. But I would definitely like to incorporate more poses that are even more intricate, as well as more hands. I need to draw more hands to get better at them. I'm not terrible at hands, but it does take me a very long time to get them to a place where I'm happy with them. And so doing my best to incorporate them into my pieces will only make it easier in the long run. And I would also like to draw some male characters. So one last thing before I call this video is just a little note about drawing challenges in general. I always find them very interesting because if you manage to push through, they tend to go through some interesting phases. I just said interesting twice there, but it's interesting. For me, when I'm working on a drawing challenge like this, where I'm creating something every single day for a month, I usually do really well at the start of the challenge for about a week or so, and I think that is simply due to the high of a new project, for lack of a better term. You're starting something new, and it's exciting, and it's different, and you want to do well, and so you push through, or you're just generally excited, so it doesn't even feel like you have to push. Then, after the newness of the project wears off, it tends to get very difficult. You kind of want to quit on most days, and at times it might even feel like you don't really know how to draw anymore. I know that I especially get this way when I'm doing full illustrations. Some days my hand just will not draw, and that just is what it is, and I cannot do anything to prevent that from happening. However, if you can push through the middle phase, if you can push through the difficult sections where you might go days feeling like you can't draw at all, I typically find that the end feels even better than the beginning. A lot of times things will start to fall into place. You'll be getting into a bit of a rhythm, or your ideas will just be better because the creative juices have been flowing for so long. At least this tends to be the case for me, so I assume it is probably similar for a lot of other people as well. And even though it can be hard to push through when you're pretty convinced that you've just forgotten how to draw completely, for me, the feeling of satisfaction that comes with finishing a project like this makes those rough days worth it. So that's it for my little pep talk for week 2 of Inktober. I hope if you're currently in that phase where you're feeling like everything is very difficult and you're on the verge of giving up, that this helps you a little bit, especially in knowing that you're not alone. And without further ado, I'm going to transition us into the last part of this video where I'm picking the prompt for the next video. So here is the finished illustration for day number 8 of Inktober using the prompt moth. And despite the fact that I haven't actually drawn any other moths so far this month, I do think that it goes pretty well with the collection of pieces I've done thus far. Of course, part of that probably has to do with the fact that they're all black and white, but thematically I also think it fits as well. So let's move these out of the way and get on to picking the prompt for the next video. So here's our prompt hat. Let's go, I guess. And we'll go with this one, and the prompt is looking into infinity. Now, by far, I think this may be the most vague prompt we've had thus far. So there are a lot of different directions it could go, but I also really like this phrase. I think it's a lot of fun, and that something pretty interesting could be done with it. So thank you all so much for watching this video. I hope you enjoyed the time-lapse process and my thoughts on the end of week 1 and the beginning of week 2 of Inktober. You can subscribe to continue following my Inktober process, and be sure to check back very soon to see what I do with this very vague and cryptic prompt.